What's going on, Orange Nation? This is Neil Adler with another episode of Syracuse Central on the Fan Arch Network. And here we are on Thursday. Week's getting close to being done. Syracuse football on Saturday at the Dome. First home game, week 2 against UConn. Those pesky Huskies. Noontime. Syracuse is like a touchdown favorite. I think Syracuse is going to win the game, but I think it's going to be close. I do. It was close last year. But what I wanted to talk about just briefly in this segment was I saw some interesting thoughts from various Syracuse players and coaches this week, and kind of reflecting on the loss to Tennessee in Atlanta week 1. I thought some of the players' comments were they were really self-aware. They acknowledged that the team, has work to do. They made some mistakes. They got to work on their communication. Don't want to burn up timeouts to avoid delay of game penalties. There was a couple of turnovers. Players should be self-aware, but sometimes they are and sometimes they aren't. Anyway, I thought it was encouraging. Yassine Willis, one thing he said was he talked about how, Fran Brown, the head coach, was really upset. The whole team was, obviously. And that Yassine thinks that they'll use that game as fuel for the rest of the season. They gave an effort, but they can give even more effort moving forward. He said something to the extent of, we feel like we were able to compete with them, but we didn't give as much effort as we were supposed to. So that was kind of interesting, just because I feel like, and again, Fran Brown's only in his second year as Syracuse's head coach, and he's only in his second year as a head coach in college. But I feel like if there's one thing from a Fran Brown-led team, they're always going to give 144%. You see what I did there? 144% effort. So I thought that was kind of an interesting quote. I don't know. I think Syracuse gave their best effort. They gave it their all. Tennessee right now is just a better team. They're just more talented. Tyshawn Russell, the wide receiver, the transfer, he said, let me look at my notes here. He said, we are talented and have all the right pieces, but we don't have 5-star talents all over the board. I believe Coach Fran Brown knows how to coach us. I'm excited about my first home game. We're going to get this dub, blah, blah, blah. So, yeah. And he also said we beat ourselves in certain moments. So Tyshawn is right. Syracuse doesn't have as much, they don't have any 5 stars on their current roster. They've got Calvin Russell for 2026. And they've got, but they got some guys that were, I shouldn't say that. I think some of their transfers some of them might have been either high 4 stars or 5 stars in high school. But obviously that, doesn't really mean much now. But, the point is that Syracuse, they were a 2-touchdown underdog to Tennessee. They ended up losing by 19. It could have been closer. I guess it could have been more of a blowout too. I don't know. I feel like if anything, it would have been a little bit closer because they had a few more chances to score and they missed 2 2-point conversions. So, we move on. It's a quarterback that's new to the system, but he's also wasn't a full-time starter last year, Angeli. And, a lot of new faces or guys in bigger roles on both sides of the line. And, there's question marks at linebacker and on the edge. And again, I feel like the guys are saying themselves, look, Tennessee beat us. We got beat. They're a more talented team, but we still got talent, and we're just getting, we're pissed off about that, but now we're going to get ready for UConn. And I think that's the right attitude. So I like that. And I don't know. I think they gave plenty of effort. Drop me a comment in the comment section. Do you think that Syracuse didn't give their best effort or as much effort as they were supposed to in the first game? I don't know. And I'm not picking on Willis. Like, whatever. He played well. He had 90 plus rushing yards, 3 touchdowns. But I don't know. I feel like they gave their effort. They just got beat. So we'll see. But I feel like these guys are hungry to show that they're a good team in week 2. It's their first home game. I hope there's a big crowd. I'd love to be there, but I'll be in Tennessee with my son. But they're focused on UConn now. It's over and done with, Tennessee, and their season's not over. I'm not saying they're going to make the college football playoff, but a lot of Texas lost in week 1. Notre Dame lost in week one. Clemson lost in week. And I'm not putting Syracuse on necessarily the same level as those teams. I'm just saying it's a 12-game regular season. Multiple teams that'll get in the playoff will have multiple losses. Teams don't really go undefeated that much anymore, do they? Ohio State had 2 losses last year, won the whole thing. So on to UConn we go. All right, a little bit of football recruiting here. So saw something in the last few days on Instagram and wanted to just to touch on it briefly because Syracuse is kind of pretty much done with their 2026 class, trying to hold on to key guys. But 2027 is interesting, and it's it's still relatively early. The guys in the 2027 class are just starting their junior years. College coaches could only start initiating direct communication with them this past summer. Well, it's still the summer. This past June 15th. So we still got a ways to go. But right now, Syracuse's 2027 class is, I think, number 4 according to 24/7 Sports Composite. And they've got 4 verbal pledges, all 3 stars. But anyway, who we're going to talk about here is this guy by the name of Colt Lumpus. I hope I got that right. He's a 4-star tight end in the 2027 class, and recently on Instagram, he came out the top 10 and included Syracuse, which is obviously always great. You want to be on a list cut versus not being on it, but it's also kind of indicative of where Syracuse is with their recruiting. They're still not going to get like a flood of 5 stars, at least not right now. But, when they're going up against the big boys and they're making these top 6s or top 10s or whatever it is, and they're on the list, that's still saying something. So let me read this list to you. It's Syracuse football, Florida State, Alabama, Michigan, North Carolina, Penn State, Tennessee, Florida, Ohio State, and Ole Miss. Okay, so, obviously Alabama stunk in week 1, but Alabama's Alabama. Bill Belichick and Carolina. Penn State's a really good team. Tennessee, obviously. I think Florida's trending up. Ohio State just won the title last year and beat Texas in the week 1. Ole Miss is a solid SEC team. And then Michigan won the year before Ohio State won the title. So, I mean, that's good company to be in. All right. So, Colt, he plays at Lawrence High School in Lawrenceville, New Jersey. And as we all know, Fran Brown, Elijah Robinson, and other Syracuse coaches, Nunzio, are from New Jersey. So they recruit the Garden State hard. So I'm not saying Syracuse is going to win out for this guy, but they're definitely going to be in the mix. Now, he's visited a couple times, according to his social media. I believe one of the games he visited for was the regular season finale in late November last year when Syracuse came back and beat Miami after being down 21-0 in the first half. So, we'll see if he's got some. I was looking through his X page, and he's got some other visits coming up to other schools. I didn't see anything about a Syracuse game day visit this fall, but there could be one. And if he doesn't, does that mean Syracuse is out? I don't know. I mean, Calvin Russell visited Syracuse unofficially multiple times, but didn't take an official before he made his announcement, and he committed to Syracuse. And now he can officially visit Syracuse this fall, and he can't officially visit any of his other finalists because he's already taken OVs there. And in football, you can take OVs to an unlimited number of schools, but you can only do 1 per school. See, in college, unless there's a head coaching change. In basketball, you can take 1 official visit. You get unlimited per school, but then you can take 1 to the same school, like in different academic years. So, we'll see if he takes an official to Syracuse. He's one of the best tight ends in the country. He's a highly rated top 200 national prospect. And again, I think it's good that Syracuse has made the list cut for him and for these other guys. We talked about Nick Lanier recently. He's not come out with a list cut, but Syracuse is in the mix for him. KJ Caldwell, I believe Syracuse made his top 10 recently. They're throwing out new offers to highly ranked 2027 guys. I believe earlier this week, Syracuse, for instance, they offered a 4-star quarterback in the 2027 class. His name is Hank Hendricks. Am I getting that right? Yeah. And he plays at Fayetteville High School in Arkansas. And he's a top 5 quarterback, top 85 national prospect in the 2027 class per Rivals. So again, Syracuse, their recruiting is nice and it's trending up, and they're going after big name guys, top flight guys, and Fran Brown ain't scared of anyone. So we'll see how Syracuse fares with Colt and in the 2027 classes, as a whole. And, I'll keep tabs on that. So next up, we're going to talk here. Let me just grab some water. we're going to talk here about. So this is a cool story, um, and definitely drop me comments on this one. Okay, so John Wildhack, the athletics director, he had a press conference earlier this week, talked about a bunch of different things. I'll probably carve out some of his thoughts about other things for other segments for Syracuse Central. But on this one, Syracuse has this um, home and home series with Penn State coming up in 2027 and 2028, if memory serves correct. But Wildhack said earlier this week that they have a home and home contract with another Big Ten school that I believe has been finalized but hasn't been announced yet, or they're working on it, whatever. But the story here is, or the discussion here is, who would you want, putting Penn State to the side, in the Big Ten, like who would you want Syracuse to play? And there's a lot of different factors that come into this. Certainly with the Big Ten and their expansion, there's teams on the West Coast now, USC and UCLA, so you got to think about travel and all the logistics there. You also want to think about, want to schedule a quality Big Ten team, but you also don't, you want to make sure you schedule it with a team that you hopefully could beat. So do you take, Penn State's really good, but do you take Ohio State, Michigan, and some of the others off the board because you don't think you can win? Or screw that. Fran Brown is like, bring it on. I want to play all the heavyweights. So, and then you think about like recruiting and television markets and audiences and ratings and all that stuff. I don't know. I mean, for me personally, I don't want to see Syracuse in any sport get their butt kicked, but I want to see them play at Ohio State and Michigan, and they got Penn State on the schedule. So bring it on. Or Wisconsin's usually a pretty solid program. Nebraska, are they on the up and up? Well, we all joke about Rutgers. I don't know. I got nothing against Rutgers. Actually, one of my best friend's his wife went there, so I don't have anything against. And a good friend of mine, he went there as well. So I don't even. People joke about Rutgers and like chat forums, Syracuse chat forums. I don't really have an opinion about it, but I don't, whatever. But they wouldn't be like high up on my list. Honestly, for me, and this is just like a personal thing, like back in the day when I was a young kid, even before I got into Syracuse sports and then ultimately went to Syracuse, went to Newhouse in the late 90s. But I loved USC football growing up. I don't know why. I have no idea. I grew up in Maryland. Why would I like USC football? I don't know. But I liked USC. I remember when they were really good with Rodney Peete, and they played Notre Dame one year when they were 1-2, and just the Trojans and the marching band. And I don't know. So USC could be cool. They've had their struggles the last few years with Lincoln Riley at the helm, but maybe they're on the way back. I don't know. If I had to choose, I'd probably, with Penn State already out there, I'd probably choose either Ohio State, Michigan, or maybe USC. But then again, if you look at from recruiting and all that, like, do you want to schedule a team like Maryland, the Terps, which is, a hometown team for me. My mom went there. I live 20 minutes from College Park. Do you schedule the Terps? Because that's, the Baltimore, Washington, the DMV corridor, which is a huge recruiting market for Syracuse. I know they played Purdue a couple years ago. I don't know. Michigan State? I don't know. If I had to choose, my first three would be Michigan, Ohio State, and USC. And then I'd also throw in Maryland. I think Syracuse played Maryland a bunch of years ago, but just from like a geographic and recruiting standpoint. But let me know what you think. I am so curious what other fans think about, in terms of, there's also, who are the other two Big Ten teams that transferred with Washington and Oregon? Oregon's was really good last year. That could be a cool trip out west. Yeah, I'd put Oregon up there. Washington, I don't know if there's good. They made the title game a couple years ago when they lost to Michigan, but yeah. So if I had my four choices, it'd be Michigan, Ohio State, USC, and Oregon, followed by Maryland. So tell me how absolutely silly my picks are, and let me know what you think. Who do you want to see Syracuse play in the Big Ten besides Penn State? All right, one more recruiting thing. I've talked about to Darius Hughes a bunch. Just going to keep hammering away on these potential flip targets for Syracuse and for other teams trying to poach Syracuse because, Syracuse has a good 2026 class. It's in the top 25 nationally right now. And they might try and flip a guy like Cuse, or, again, teams are trying to flip Calvin Russell, some of the other four stars for Syracuse that are committed, like a guy like Cameron Wilson or Javion Cooper, um, Jarius Rogers, the edge rusher. So we'll see. But in terms of Hughes, I'm pretty sure I talked on Syracuse Central and it was all over social media, earlier, that in their opener, he plays for Miami Northwestern Senior High School, the same as Nick Lanier and Calvin Russell. But in their opener, which I think was a preseason game, it was a few weeks ago, he had on Syracuse gloves. So that was kind of cool. So that was like all over the internet and blah, blah, blah. But there was an article, I think it was Rivals had an article with him. And I'm pretty sure he was at the Miami Notre Dame game, Miami Hurricanes, on Sunday. And Russell was there too. And all these analysts, as I talked about on Syracuse Central yesterday, are like, oh, Calvin Russell was there in Miami. The Hurricanes won their game, so he, of course, is going to flip to Miami, which is total nonsense. Totally ridiculous. Anyway, in terms of Hughes, he's a four-star safety or defensive back. He's top 300 national prospect. Might be a little higher than that some places. But he talked about how he might take an official visit to Miami because he hasn't done so. He's already taken an official to Syracuse, so he couldn't do that again. He was also talking about doing one to Nebraska, but he's verbally committed to Florida State. But this quote was interesting. Okay, let me read it. Let me get this. So he talks about Florida State, and his quote to Rivals was, I talk to them, Florida State, almost every day. I've been committed for over a year. They just know that I'm kind of locked in. Even though I'm viewing other schools, I'm pretty sure I'm locked in with Florida State right now. And look, okay, that's cool. And these kids are teenagers and they give interviews all the time. And I don't want to like pick apart like little bits and pieces of his quote. And I'm not saying Syracuse is going to get him, but he says things like, I'm kind of locked in. I'm pretty sure I'm locked in right now. That's why it's like tough, like when these kids, again, they're young teenagers and they got agents in their ear and NIL money and all this other and now revenue sharing, direct revenue sharing. It's like they verbally commit, and then other teams try and flip them until the earlier traditional signing period is just December and then February. But I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying Syracuse isn't going to get Hughes, but those quotes definitely, if I was a Florida State coach and saw them, I'd be like, all right, man, we better be all over this kid because. But that's the same way we could, other teams trying to poach Calvin Russell. So I'm not saying he's going to flip to Syracuse, and Syracuse can't have him for an official. He could unofficially visit for a game day, and I could see him going up there for a visit. Maybe he'll go up there the same weekend as Calvin Russell. Russell will take his official. Hughes will take an unofficial. Maybe Neil Lanier. Oh God, if they got Lanier, they all play for the same high school, Miami Northwestern. If they all went up that weekend, Hughes, Lanier, and Russell, that would be sick. Syracuse social media would go on fire, like in a good way. So we'll keep tabs. Hughes has said good things about. He's said good things about Syracuse in the past. Do I think that Syracuse is going to flip? No, it's kind of like some of these other guys that committed to Florida schools, but then, had Syracuse among their finalists, and said, it's kind of like, it reminds me of CJ Hester. So he plays for a high school in Florida. And he took an official to Syracuse over the summer, and then he committed to Florida, and Florida had the buzz most of the time. But like, I think Iowa was there and Syracuse was right there. And he said all these great things about Syracuse, but he ultimately committed to Florida. And so I don't know, it could be a case with Hughes where, look, he likes Fran Brown, his teammate is going to play for Syracuse, Calvin Russell, other guys are getting recruited from Miami Northwestern by Syracuse coaches. There's a couple of 2025 guys, 3-star guys that are freshmen now for Syracuse that went to Miami. So like, there's a pipeline there. So again, Hughes could be looking at Syracuse and like it a lot, but ultimately he could decide that I'm locked in with Florida State, or I'm going to go to Miami because that's a hometown team for me. Or maybe he likes Nebraska. It is what it is. I just thought it was telling that he was saying, I'm kind of locked in, or I think, or that, it was just, there was like little caveats there. So again, not picking apart to Darius Hughes, but just something to think about. the next few months, obviously, we'll be covering Syracuse football, but there'll be a lot of stuff with Syracuse football recruiting, both in terms of 2026, mainly Syracuse trying to hold off poachers for Calvin Russell and other highly ranked guys, and then looking into 2027 and beyond. So there'll be a lot of intel, a lot of rumors, a lot of this, a lot of that, and I'll get into all that. Get into more basketball and basketball recruiting as we go along, but obviously football is the focus right now. So let me know what you think. I appreciate you tuning in. This is Neil Adler with Syracuse Central via the Fan Arch Network. We got one more day to go until Syracuse versus UConn. Thank you so much for tuning in. Take care, my friends.